Hey, what's up, you guys? This is the second part of the webinar that took place on the 8th of July, where we spoke about cybersecurity and data protection. The second speaker of the night was Matthias Wilson. He is an experienced open source intelligence practitioner and social engineer. He will speak about social engineering attacks and how to defend from them. Please check down below to see the first part if you haven't seen it already, or check the next part after you see this one. Enjoy.
So hey everybody, I hope you can hear me, and I will just get right to it in this lightning talk. Basically, short amount of time and a lot of information I want to bring across to you. So first of all, without going into all the details of myself and what I do, I was introduced as an open source intelligence analyst and a social engineer, something that I have done on my job and in my current job, but something that I'm also very passionate about. So to me, it is a hobby, and I spend a lot of my free time actually doing open source intelligence. And in some case, I actually end up doing investigations where I do need a specific amount of social engineering. If you want to find out more about me and what I do and what open source intelligence is, or read cool stories on this topic, I advise you to go to my blog, keyfindings.blog. Now, today's topic is social engineering in the context of COVID-19. What I want to do is I want to give you a couple of examples of what I see at the moment, because during this crisis, there is a shift in how we work and how we live our lives, and that does have implications on the way we communicate, on the way we broadcast ourselves. So there are certain risks and vulnerabilities, certain dangers out there that you should be aware of when you are actually looking into protecting yourself, protecting your company, protecting your intellectual property from social engineering and open source intelligence. Now, how do these two belong together? Well, first of all, what I would always do is I would try to find everything that is openly available. So that is the open source intelligence part. Some people say that is fancy Googling, but in fact, it is a lot more than that, looking into many, many different sources online. And the moment that you hit a certain blockade and you can't find information publicly available, the next step would actually be to try to approach people and to get them to talk. That is basically the essence of social engineering. You can get people to talk, to share information with you. You can also use social engineering to get people to open a specific email that you have placed malware in. So we're in the whole hacking area, which also has a great portion of social engineering. So there are many, many, many different fields, many areas out there where we actually have social engineering. Now, before I continue with this presentation, I would just like to pull up the first poll and ask you a question on how do you use social media, or do you use social media? So I'll give you a couple seconds to answer this question, and then based on the results, we'll see how we move on. And please excuse me always looking to the left, because I'm working with dual monitors here, so I'm not ignoring you. I'm just checking on what's going on in the poll. So as I can see here, many of you have accounts. You're not a frequent user, so that tells me that maybe you have accounts, old accounts, with old information. And this old information can also be relevant for a social engineer, but we'll get to that a bit later. And again, we also have people here that say they cannot survive without Instagram or Facebook or something like that. So those are my absolute favorite targets, because they will give me a lot of attack vectors to work with later on. But how does this work? Well, first of all, before I engage in a social engineering attack, before I try to approach someone and talk to them, I will actually try to figure out as much as I can about this person. So that could be looking at all the information available online, not just about the person, but about the company, about the surroundings. So I'm basically going throughout the web, checking multiple sources such as social media, Facebook, LinkedIn. I will go into company data in some cases. I will maybe find people on certain blogs or microblogging environments like Reddit, and I'll just try to get a general picture of who am I targeting, which company am I targeting, which person am I targeting. And based on all that information, I kind of build a dossier. I write all this information down, because it is very important to me to have this at hand for the actual social engineering attack later on, so that I really know what I'm talking about. I also might go to Google Maps and figure out where a specific target lives, where the company is, what relevant things are around that, because this is all information that I could use later on. So all of this is kind of the reconnaissance phase, the phase before I get into the actual social engineering attack. So that is the one part of the reconnaissance phase, actually looking into all these online activities and all this information and trying to figure out how I can use this. Because the idea of social engineering at the end of the day is actually to make my target think that I am close to them, that I possibly know them, that I'm somehow involved in their life, so they will trust me. That also implies that I have a certain cover story for myself, so a pretext to actually approach my target in a plausible way. Now, one thing could be, just a really theoretical example, is I figure out that there is construction work starting at my target company next week or in 2 weeks or in 3 weeks, so that might enable me to pose as someone from that construction company with certain questions beforehand. That would be a plausible pretext, a plausible cover story, which will actually enable me to properly engage my target. So how do I do this? Well, fairly easy. I just go online and I try to collect information, and a lot of us post way too much on the internet. So you are seeing real live examples here, not relevant to any of the cases I have worked on, but something that is basically fairly new. So here from October 2019, a company was very proud to present their new IDs. I'm on Instagram, I find this might be my target company, and now I know what their ID card looks like. So in some cases, not any that I have personally worked on, but that friends of mine have worked on, they would just replicate this ID card and try to use this to gain access to a certain premise. So that's, the first risk that we actually have here. We also see the names of certain company employees here. We see their actual functions in the company. So a lot of information that I could use. So I could also actually call somewhere and say, hey, I'm the friend of this and this person, or the colleague of this and this person, let's talk. Nowadays, we also have a lot of things like right now, we're in a Zoom meeting, so there might be people that actually share this information. And I've seen this before, that people actually share links to Zoom meetings or pictures like this, which for me as a social engineer is kind of a gold mine. So one attack vector could be if someone shares a Zoom meeting link to the public in some way, just hop on that Zoom meeting, listen to what they have to say, and use that information later on. Or as you can see here, we see lots of different people with names. That is also information that I could use later on. And kind of the most relevant for a lot of social engineering cases is when people actually share their office, images of their office, something that will make me as a social engineer familiar with the IT they're working with, where I might get other details out of it. So here, hashtag home office, which is the German word for work from home. People show their actual office setup. So if I had a high resolution version of this image, I might be able to find the phone number displayed in the display on the left. I can maybe zoom in and see what information is on the document in the trays on the right. And I also can clearly see what operating system is used and maybe even indications on the software here. So a social engineering attack in this context could actually be someone calling this person, because now they have the phone number, and stating, hey, I'm from IT. We need to update your software. I see you are running this and this and this. And the person, of course, does not know this because they're in IT. They know this because of such a picture that was shared on social media. So, the most important message here, and I will get to that later on again in the lessons learned basically, is don't do this. Think before you post. That is the most relevant thing. So before we move on to the next slide, I would like to pull up the next poll. So please answer this poll. What changed for you during the COVID period? Do you need to get out there more? Are you lonely? Are you on the phone more often? Are you in meetings like this more often? What changed for you?
All right, a couple of seconds more, and I think we got it.
So apparently a lot of us are fine staying at home all alone. I assume that's the IT people. No, jokes aside, but a lot of us also are really longing for social contacts again, are longing for conversations. And this is something that I notice in my daily life. Like last week, I was on the phone with Lufthansa. I'm talking about a ticket. And that was also a woman working from home. And we spent a half an hour on the phone talking about a whole bunch of different stuff except my ticket, because she was so happy to have this social interaction again. So this is also something that, of course, a social engineer could use. We're looking at people that are lonely. We're looking at people that want more social contacts, because that is the nature of us humans. And during the time that we cannot physically go to other places, like this group here, we'll be on more calls, we'll have more video conferencing, and all this mixed together will make us more susceptible to social engineering, but also to phishing attacks through emails, for example, or so-called vishing, where I try to do the same thing over a phone call. So if I were a social engineer and I wanted to approach someone, I wouldn't get right to the point and say, hey, just go look at your browser and do this and click here and do that. I want to break the ice first. So this is also something that a social engineer might do. How would you break the ice? Well, you have to know about this person and get them into a conversation. And where do you find information on people nowadays? That was one of the polls we had before. We actually go into social media. And here is another very relevant and interesting thing. Depending on which target you are looking at, you will be looking at different sources of information. Now, my daughter always says Facebook is for old people, and she is kind of right when it comes to that. Because if I look at my daughter, she's on TikTok, she's on Instagram, she's on YouTube. I won't find her on a career network, for example, or Facebook or Twitter. So this is also something from the OSINT world that is relevant for social engineering, knowing your target and knowing where to find information. Also, if we're looking at someone from a different culture than ours, we might not find them on the social media platforms that we actually know. If we're looking for someone from Russia, we might find them on VK or OK, which is kind of the Russian Facebook. So that is all what we need to actually engage on a personal level with one of our social engineering victims. And now let's pull up the last poll before we move on to the next slide. And this is a very relevant thing too. I'm not interested in your family life, but I just want to prove my point based on the answers you give. So a lot of you said the family is not on social media, not that you know of. Some of you said they're on there, they share family moments. Like my daughter, 7% of you said your kid is dancing on TikTok all the time. And this is also very, very relevant. So security doesn't stop with you. You also have to take that to your family. So for example, if you're not on Facebook, you're not on Instagram, you're not on Twitter or anything, and there's no information that can be found about you personally, maybe people can find out about you through your family. So also make them aware of what they share, because the information there can also be used against you. Now, how would this work? When I call someone for such a social engineering attack, I want to gain their trust. And there's a lot of psychology involved here, and given the shortness of time we have, I'm not going to get into that, but I really have to know how this person is and how this person's personality is. Is it a very vain person? Is it a very introverted person? Depending on that, I will try to steer my conversation. And what I've always tried to do is break the ice. So for example, I have a target where I know that this target has 3 kids, and this soccer mom basically always has to take the kids to soccer practice. So I might engage the conversation starting out with, hey, I'm really grateful you took my call. I'm calling from the IT department. And I'm kind of in a hurry, but I got to pick my kids up from soccer practice, and you're probably aware of this hassle. And if I'm lucky, this will be enough to break the ice, and we'll get engaged into a personal conversation, make that person feel more comfortable, and at the end might enable me to ask the proper and the right questions. Now, what I just said is I'm from the IT department. Now, of course, you always have to do your recon, like I said before, So if we're talking about a multinational company that has thousands of employees, that might work. If we're talking about a 3-person company and we call one of those 3 people and say, hey, we're the 4th person in the company that doesn't exist, obviously that doesn't work. So proper preparation is one of the most important things. So that was basically it, to give you a little insight on what a social engineer would do in a social engineering attack. There are different types of information that can be gained. Information from questioning, information that will enable you to actually place malware in the system by convincing someone to click on a link. And there are basically very, very simple steps that you can follow to kind of not make this happen. I'm not saying it will not happen to you, because I also know that social engineers can also be social engineered. That's human nature. But when talking about this, please keep work away from social media. That's one of the most important things, so don't post office pictures or anything. Always be aware that private information can be used against you, and remember also what your family posts. And one of the most important things is think before you speak, or think before you post. So if someone calls you, you've never heard of this person, and even if they persuade you and want you to think that they know about your system, it might not be the IT person. So just be aware of that. And that, ladies and gentlemen, concludes my lightning talk on the topic of social engineering. Thank you very much.